Hazel and Joshua were in the kitchen, silent. He stirred his cup of coffee, lost in his own thoughts, while she packed the bags almost automatically, avoiding looking at him. The small town she often talked about was just a few hours away, and the air between them was heavy with something unspoken. Joshua finally broke the silence. "Hazel, you never told me much about your life there. What is it about your town that you don't want to talk about?" She remained quiet, looking at the open suitcase, then turned to him with a forced smile. "I already told you there's nothing much, Joshua. It just wasn't easy for me there. And so I'm a bit nervous about this trip." He wanted to be by her side, but whatever Hazel was hiding seemed to be heavier than he could have imagined. The sun was already setting on the horizon when Joshua and Hazel arrived in the small country town. The rental car wound through the cobblestone streets, while Hazel excitedly pointed out places from her childhood. Joshua watched everything with curiosity, noticing how people on the sidewalks seemed to recognize his wife, waving and smiling. Hazel was a woman of medium height, with wavy brown hair framing a delicate face. Her honey-colored eyes shone with excitement as she revisited her hometown after so many years. Joshua, a tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair and green eyes, smiled at his wife's joy. They had met 3 years ago when Hazel moved to the big city to work as a primary school teacher. Joshua, a successful engineer, was charmed by the simplicity and kindness of the young woman from the countryside. Her sweet nature and willingness to always help others quickly won him over. Upon arriving at the small inn where they would be staying, they were warmly welcomed by the owner, a middle-aged lady named Mabel. "Hazel, my dear, it's been so long," exclaimed the lady, hugging her tightly. "And this must be your husband. Welcome to our town." Joshua noticed how Mabel's eyes lit up when she looked at Hazel, as if she were in the presence of someone very special. He smiled, a little confused, but happy to see his wife so warmly received. Perhaps it was because it was a small town, but everyone seemed very warm and friendly. Hazel seemed more cheerful and relaxed, as if she had imagined monsters about the city in her mind, but now she realized that, in fact, everything was fine. After settling into the cozy room, decorated with rustic furniture and floral curtains, they decided to take a walk through the central square. The cool night air carried the scent of flowers and the distant sound of cicadas. The yellow lights of the street lamps illuminated the path, creating a welcoming and nostalgic atmosphere. As they walked hand in hand, Joshua noticed how people looked at Hazel. It wasn't just recognition, there was something more: respect, admiration, even gratitude. He began to wonder what exactly his wife had left behind in this small town. The following morning they decided to visit the local market. The colourful stalls displayed fresh fruits, lush vegetables, and local crafts. The cheerful buzz of conversations and negotiations filled the air. Hazel walked among the stalls, greeting people and introducing Joshua to old acquaintances. It was then that an elderly man with calloused hands and a face marked by the sun approached them. His name was Walter, and he looked at Hazel with an expression of deep respect. "Your wife is a warrior. You're lucky, young man," he said to Joshua with a warm smile. Joshua thanked him, a bit disconcerted as his curiosity grew. What exactly did Walter mean by that? He looked at Hazel, who smiled shyly, a slight blush on her cheeks. As the day progressed, Joshua began to subtly ask questions of the people they encountered. Gradually, fragments of Hazel's story began to emerge, not from her mouth, but through the voices of those who admired her. Rose, a lady who sold homemade bread, recounted how Hazel, still a teenager, started taking care of her 2 younger siblings alone after the tragic death of their parents. "That girl was only 16 years old but took on adult responsibilities without flinching," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. She made a point to remember how Hazel worked in the harvest of coffee and cotton on the local farms. She would arrive tired but always with a smile on her face. She would buy the basics to feed her siblings and never, ever complained. Joshua felt his heart tighten with each new story he heard. The image he had of Hazel, The sweet teacher he'd met in the big city was beginning to take on new dimensions. Everyone liked to converse a lot, and the stories emerged nostalgically. In the afternoon, they went to visit Hazel's brothers, now grown men and respected farmers in the region. The emotion of the reunion was palpable, and Joshua watched fascinated by the interaction among the siblings. They spent the day there, and Hazel went to visit a longtime friend who lived nearby, while Joshua stayed with his brothers-in-law. Sitting on the porch of the simple but well-kept house, Charles, the middle brother, finally opened up to Joshua. He told how Hazel sacrificed her own youth to raise them. "She slept in an old shed for months, Joshua," said Charles, his voice choked with emotion. "Our house was falling apart, and she preferred that we have the better rooms. She was cold but never complained." Luke, the youngest brother, added, "Hazel studied late at night to maintain the scholarship she got. Sometimes I'd see her dozing over her books, but the next day there she was, waking us up with a smile and hot coffee on the table." Joshua listened in silence, filled with a mix of admiration and guilt. How had he not realized before the extraordinary strength his wife possessed? It was as if he were discovering a new facet of her, fierce and protective, almost like a lioness in front of those she loved. But why had she never told him these details? The question echoed in his mind as he tried to absorb everything he had heard. As night fell, while they walked back to the inn, Joshua held Hazel's hand and said softly, "You told me you went through hardships, but I never imagined how much." Hazel smiled slightly and replied, "What's done is done, love. The important thing is that we're all well now." But Joshua knew it wasn't quite like that. From that moment on, his perception of Hazel and life would never be the same. He had loved her before, but now his admiration had grown to a level even he couldn't explain. In the days that followed, Joshua observed Hazel with new eyes. He began to recall how she always stopped to help someone on the street, how she patiently listened to the stories of the elderly, how she played lovingly with the children running through the square. All of this was shaped by years of struggling through difficulties. Every act of kindness, every gentle smile now had a new meaning. Joshua understood that they weren't just personality traits, but reflections of a life of overcoming and compassion. On a sunny afternoon, they decided to have a picnic by a stream on the outskirts of the city. The place was idyllic, with crystal-clear waters flowing between smooth stones and soft green grass on the banks. Sitting on a checkered blanket, enjoying fresh fruits and sandwiches, Joshua finally gathered the courage to talk openly about what he had discovered. "Hazel," he began hesitantly, "these days I've learned so much about you, about your story. Why have you never told me all this?" Hazel looked at the horizon, her eyes reflecting the stream's waters. After a moment of silence, she responded, "I don't like to talk about the past, Joshua. I don't want people to see me as a victim or a heroine. I prefer them to know me for who I am today." Joshua nodded, understanding. "But you are extraordinary, Hazel. What you did for your siblings, how you overcame so many difficulties. It's inspiring." Hazel smiled, a little embarrassed. "I did what anyone would do for their family. I don't consider myself special for that." "But you are," Joshua insisted, holding her hands. "You are the strongest and most generous person I've ever known, and I feel like a fool for not having realized that before." Tears began to form in Hazel's eyes. "Joshua, you met me as I am now. That's what matters. The past shaped me, and I am grateful for everything I've experienced." In that moment, Joshua fully understood. Hazel was not just the woman he thought he knew in the big city. She was the sum of difficult experiences, silent struggles, and humble victories. Every act of kindness, every smile, every word of comfort she offered to others came from a deep place of understanding and empathy. She wasn't just the sweet and calm teacher he had met. She was much more. She was someone who had faced the world alone, but always with a lightness and generosity he had never imagined. During the remaining days of the trip, Joshua felt as if he were getting to know a new Hazel every moment. He listened intently to the stories she finally felt comfortable sharing, and with each account, his respect and admiration for her grew. He held her tighter, as if he wanted to protect her from everything she had already faced, as if he could somehow relieve the burden of all those struggles she had never asked for help with. They returned home exhausted, but Joshua felt a weight that was not of physical tiredness, but of a new perception of life. He saw her in the living room, arranging the cushions on the sofa, a simple gesture that seemed to resonate deeply in his heart. Without thinking, he approached and hugged her tightly, feeling a wave of love and gratitude he never knew he possessed. "I'm lucky to have you in my life, my love," he said, almost speechless. Hazel softly smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm the lucky one, thank you for everything," she replied, with a genuine smile but also with a lightness he now understood. But within him, there was something new, something he was still trying to understand. Joshua realized that many times before this trip, he had underestimated Hazel. She seemed simple, modest, and that made him, unwittingly, see her in a superficial way, as someone without great stories or complexity. He now knew that Hazel's simplicity was indeed a silent strength, built from much more than he could have imagined. And reflecting on everything she had been and become, Joshua felt a new kind of gratitude for life. He knew that his own life had always been blessed, but often he did not value it enough. At that moment, he became fully aware of how precious life was and of the simple yet profound things he had never paid attention to. He felt more aware, more attentive, and more willing to be better, not only as a husband, but as a person. In the days that followed, he made a silent yet firm decision. He would do everything to never underestimate the inner strength of someone, especially Hazel. He promised to be a better, more attentive, more understanding partner, because now he knew it was not just about loving someone. It was also about understanding, respecting, and valuing what truly makes a person who they are. And Hazel, the woman he thought he knew, was no longer just his wife. He now admired her much more, and he knew she had changed him forever. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.